Good morning and welcome to a very special daily Devo. You might be wondering why I have this silly hat on my head and why I'm acting like it's a party, because it is. You have made it today to the 100th daily Devo. Man, I know, I can't believe it myself. Today is the 100th video of daily Devos since we began them last March. And at the beginning of the COVID-19 season. So what a special day. And today we have a very special topic to talk about. One of the most important words in the entire Bible. I'm going to ask your forgiveness in advance for the lighting of this video. The sun is just rising over my backyard. It has not made it to the roof line where it's nice and out of the way yet. So it is right in my face, and you get to enjoy the full magnificence of that today. But one of the most important words in the Bible is the word covenant. Do you know this word, covenant? Covenant is different than a contract. Covenant is an agreement between two parties, and it involves a much deeper level of commitment than just a contract. We live in a world of contracts and loopholes, but God is a God of covenant. So the agreements, I guess the type of relationship he enters into with his creatures is one of covenant. So we find covenants all throughout the Bible, with Adam and Eve, with Noah, with Abraham, with Moses, with David. And then Jesus says, I come to bring a new covenant. As we continue looking through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, in chapter 5, beginning in verse 27, we begin to read about some really heavy topics. Now, last week we already looked at the fact that Jesus is elevating certain aspects of the law. He said, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. And then he starts upping the ante on what we've heard it said. You've heard it said, don't commit murder. But I tell you that if you even speak in an unbridled way out of hatred and anger towards your brother and sister, you've already committed murder in your heart. So Jesus goes on to continue to address hard topics in this passage. You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce, but I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is God's footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Now, I told you these were hard topics, and I wasn't kidding. And I just want to say, in a moment of pastoral sensitivity, this is real for me. Divorce has hit close to home for me many times, not because I have been divorced, but because I have been close to family and friends. I know couples right now who are getting divorced, and it's tragic and it's sad. I know couples right now that are preparing for marriage and preparing to enter a new life together. What a strange season to be experiencing such major life changes, but it's happening. So the first thing I want to say is sometimes we read these passages and people's ears perk up, especially if you are wrestling with any kind of guilt and shame for something you're currently going through or have gone through. This is not the place for me to have those conversations, so let me just say up front that if this raises certain questions for you that you need to address pastorally, send me a message. Contact me. If I'm not your pastor, contact your pastor and have a more pastoral conversation. This is more devotional. So don't be surprised. It's not that I'm skirting the hard issues. It's that certain hard issues need to be dealt with case by case. But what we can say and apply to all of our contexts is that Jesus is clearly elevating the idea of covenant and also what it means to be a person of integrity in everything that we just read together. So he's talking about integrity, right? And he uses this hyperbole that if one part of your body causes you to sin, you should actually cut that part of your body off. Now, we know that everyone sins. We talked about that in the sermon yesterday, right? So if Jesus meant this literally, there would be a lot of one-armed, one-eyed Christians walking around, right? Every Christian would have an eye patch because we've all sinned with our eyes. Every Christian would have a deformed mouth because we've all sinned with our mouth. So we would have to be mutilating our body, which Jesus also specifically says in other places not to do. So he's using hyperbole, which is a literary device, a figure of speech that goes to the ultimate extreme to make a point. Prophets use hyperbole a lot. Prophets speak in extremes because they want to get the audience's attention and they want us to hear how serious they are about the matter they're talking about. This is where Jesus is speaking prophetically and hyperbolically. He's using hyperbole. He's speaking in extremes. But what he's saying is it's not right for your whole body to be devoted to God and yet one part of your body engage in sinful behavior. What word sums that idea up? The word integrity. We are to be people of integrity. With our whole being, we are to be holy. We are to love God and love neighbor with all of our being. He talks about divorce, and he addresses in the Old Covenant how basically women were treated as property and men could divorce them very easily with very little consequence. And for the woman, that set her back and created challenges throughout her life that now she doesn't have the same opportunities that she did before that. And so Jesus, in this passage, actually says the only legitimate reason for divorce is breaking covenant. Now, he uses a specific image for what breaking covenant looks like. And again, you can have more pastoral conversations about what breaking covenant looks like today. There are certainly married people that have had biblical reason to get divorced. The covenant was broken by one or both parties, and yet they chose to try to seek God's grace and mercy, work through it. And what I would say is I've seen couples miraculously have a new marriage. It's not that they repaired the old marriage. It's that both of them were committed to a new covenant, and they ended up staying married. They ended up forming a new kind of marriage. It was a miraculous work of God. Other couples can't do that. There's just too much in the way. What is broken needs to be mended and repaired, but the only way to do that is for the couples to continue separately. So Jesus is getting into some complex, deeply spiritual stuff, but the point he's making is if we are to reflect the image of a covenant-keeping God, we have to take covenant very seriously. And we have to take covenant far more seriously than the world around us, because the world doesn't live by covenants. God does. And if God is a covenant keeper and we are his image bearers, then we are to be the witnesses in this world of what it looks like to be people of covenant who keep covenant, relentlessly keep covenant, who relentlessly live by integrity, who relentlessly mean what we say to where we don't have to qualify it with I promise or I swear or I'll make an oath. I live in a handshaking culture, and I talk to a lot of people that tell me how much times have changed. And they say it used to be that you'd make a deal. You know, we would be looking for something historical, like a document that showed when this land was given to this person or when a certain business agreement was made. And the family members would shake their heads and say, we don't have any documentation. You know, back when we did this, the world operated on a handshake, and our families made this agreement by the shaking of hands. That's actually a pretty biblical thing, to mean what you say so much that you're able just to say it and it's not questioned, and you don't have to qualify it with I promise or I'm swearing or I'm making an oath or I'm writing this down. People should believe us so much at our word that our word by itself is good. So I just want to encourage you today, and the good news behind this, that the challenge is that we need to take covenant more seriously. And so we can do some inventory today and say, what kind of covenant relationships do I have in my life? You know, I think about myself, for example. I am in covenant with my wife. I happen to be married. I would also say that I'm in covenant with my children. When you have children, whether you intend to or not, you immediately are thrown into a covenant relationship where they depend on you so much that you are in covenant to be their guardian, to raise them, to care for them, to provide for them. To me, that's an obligation given to us by God as parents when He gives us children. So I consider myself to be in a covenant relationship with my kids. I'm in a covenant relationship with the United Methodist Church. I happen to be an ordained elder, a pastor, a clergy person in the Methodist Church. And so there came a time when the Methodist Church talked to me about entering into covenant with that tribe of the Christian family. And so I chose to do that, and there were certain stipulations. I came from a different denomination when I was younger that would have had different stipulations. So we have these covenant relationships and covenant agreements that we enter into. And so the question today is, am I a covenant keeper? Am I a person of integrity? Am I living wholly in the same way? Or do I live one way over here, and when I get over here, I live a slightly different way? That's the challenge in the message today, is to evaluate ourselves, to do some self-reflection, as we always try to do in these daily devos. The encouragement that I want to leave you with today is that God is a covenant-keeping God. God keeps His promises. If there is something that you need that God has already promised you today, you can count on it. You can bank on it. It's as good as done, because God is a covenant-keeping God. In fact, God is so relentless about keeping His covenant that He is not fair. Let me say that again. God is not fair when it comes to covenant, because fairness in covenant keeping is keeping your side of the covenant and making good on the threats to the other side of covenant is broken. And we see in Scripture that God does do that sometimes. But other times, when God gave the consequences for breaking the covenant, and His people did, instead of going through with it and separating Himself from them forever, God ended up keeping both sides of the covenant. Or God would say, you know what, you broke covenant again, so let's fashion a new one. Instead of casting them off and being done, which would have been fair, God said, you know what, I'll fashion a new covenant. And if you break that one, I'll fashion a new one. And if you break that one, I'll fashion a new one. There's this amazing story in Genesis where God causes Abraham to fall asleep, and Abraham has this image of a clay pot going through two halves of an animal that's been slaughtered. And I won't go into great detail. It's a fascinating story. I love it. But the image is God Himself being symbolized by this clay pot, this lamp, going through the two parts of the animal that they would use to cut a covenant. And the message there is, I alone am holding myself accountable for keeping this covenant. I will keep both sides of the covenant. I will do whatever it takes to be with you, to be your God, and for you to be my people. Isn't that amazing? That God did in Jesus Christ what we needed, not just to keep His side of the covenant, but to keep our side of the covenant too, to make a way for covenant breakers who are not capable in our own strength to keep a covenant with a holy God. To be reconciled to full relationship, to know that God, to be His people. It's amazing that God would do that for us. And because He's done that, He now gives us the power, the freedom, the equipment we need in order to be covenant keepers ourselves, to be people of integrity. So let's live that way today. Let's look in our lives for how we can do that more. I hope this encourages you. Happy 100th Daily Devo anniversary. Have a wonderful day. God bless you. This is Pastor Jonathan. Grace and peace.